All right, hello everybody. Happy Thursday, September 5th, 2024. You are here today for how to recession-proof your job search in 2024. My name is Albert Chen. I'm the founder of Albert's List, and I'm here with my co-host today, Elisa Huang and Joe Cardillo, who are our Bootcamp co-leads and Albert's List moderators. All right, so let's go to the next slide.
Yes, we're ready for it.
Yeah. So you might have found us through Albert's List. You might have found us through a meetup group. You might have found us somewhere else. Wherever you found us, we are glad you are here. Albert's List is an organization that is sponsoring this event today. We were founded in 2013, and we're a job search community with 50,000 job seekers, hiring managers, recruiters, career coaches, and more. And our interests in what we do is we help job seekers gain the skills they need to do a good job search and find their next job. And we also help job seekers become entrepreneurs by way of side hustles, because we know we live in a world where inflation is high, your costs are getting even higher, and you got to find ways to close that gap so you can pay rent, put food on the table, raise children, and do what you got to do in order to be a happy individual. Next slide. And so, yeah, I founded Albert's List. I named the company after myself because I am not creative whatsoever. And I'll be leading the first little bit of today's webinar. Joe.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to the band that you're going to run, and you're going to call it the Albert Keon Trio, I imagine. So keep it simple.
We are the trio, yes.
I don't blame you. I'm not very good at band names or, company names too. I'm good at a lot of branding, marketing things, but that one never struck. What a pitch for myself. Joe Cardillo, I've been a part of the Albert's List community for almost, I think, a decade, pretty much even right now. So sort of joined when Albert created it. Have really enjoyed and appreciated being part of the community and meeting a lot of different folks in a lot of different careers and industries. A few years ago, I started my own business, kind of decided to go solo and do my own thing. So I run a coaching and training firm. And then this year, I've also started doing some disinformation defense. So that a lot of my life is right now is election-related craziness. But really glad to be here. Really excited to talk with folks and and share what we know and learn from others as well.
Wonderful. And Elisa, if you can come off audio here.
Yeah, it's so great to see everyone. I, like the good little corporate worker I am, is still in the office, clocking in at the wee hours. But I'm coming in live from the Bay Area, like Albert in California. Long-time volunteer with Albert's List, helping moderate the community groups, as well as now working with Joe on the boot camps programs. And just really proud of this community and the folks that are active in the groups, just always coming together and supporting each other. And so to those that are joining on the call, thanks for spending time with us. And however Joe, Albert, myself can add value in your job search, we're here for it. So please connect with us and yourselves as well. And hopefully this can be the start of that whole process.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a little bit of an agenda for you today, and the agenda is multifaceted. What we want to talk about is where the job market stands now, as we can really say it, because we do have some breaking news that is coming tomorrow around the state of the job market. We've already seen some data today from ADP, as well as the JOLTS report this week. And depending on how you feel about that, that's a mixed bag, but it tells a broader story. We're going to talk about how to think about your job search, because I know there are probably many of you who are today here thinking about your job search and whether you're doing it correctly or not. And you're probably wondering whether that's effective. And we have a few philosophies that we'd like to at least leave today with, if you leave with nothing else. And then we're going to talk about the 5 strategies to recession-proof your job search, with examples, with artificial intelligence, and more or less what the purpose of this entire 5 heavy section is to talk about is what it is that you need to do in order to be effective in your job search, and what it means to go and look in the right places and different places so that even in tough times like this current economy, you can thrive. And then we'll get to Q&A, and then we're going to talk to you about our 8-week job search program, which starts September 9th, next Monday. And we're going to do a little bit of selling. But hopefully before that, we're going to do a lot more informing. Next slide. So in order to understand how we've gotten here, we want to tell you where we've been. And unless you've been under a rock, you clearly know where we've been. And that's the fact that we've had a lot of layoffs over the last couple of years. I was laid off myself in August of 2022. So I was somewhere in that in the left side of this column. But I've been watching the chaos happen for the last 2 years. And despite not being part of it, thankfully, God willing, it does exhaust me because I watch job seekers like many of you every single day struggle to figure out how to figure out your next move. And there's a lot of reasons that are contributing to why that's a struggle. So, if you have friends who work in government and work in retail and work what seem like stable careers telling you, oh, just go apply. And you're telling them that the market sucks and you somehow don't have a way to justify that. I'm about to justify that for you here. So, and by justifying, I'm saying that this is what the data says. It also by no means is a way to say that you don't have like a next step that you can take either, because as we'll show you afterwards, it's definitely that. And so, yeah, as Rachel says, my brother says, just apply a bunch. And I see people who say things like that, and my eyes just roll out of my face and roll down the street. And it's just, it's ridiculous. I know Joe thinks it's ridiculous,
Just put a bunch
and
of applications in Workday. It'll be easy and you'll like it.
and open like and start like 55 Workday accounts. It'll all work itself out. So yeah. Next slide. And so, with everything that is going on, we're seeing that evolution happen in our market at the moment. So this is basically everything that's happened over the last 20 years. And if you go to the right side of the chart, you'll see that COVID bump. Then we injected a ton of money into the economy. Investors loved it. They started a bunch of startups. And our unemployment rate dropped all the way down to 3.4% as late as April of last year. And starting now into July, it's up to 4.3%. The labor report expects it to drop to 4.2 tomorrow. And, it's really hard to say, but basically, it's an uneven market right now. And as much as we've done our fair share of recovering, we're also undoing some of that recovering. And if you're in the Bay Area, the next slide is going to be especially interesting to you because it showcases just how bad it's been if you've been in the Bay Area and you work in information, which means you do marketing, you're a recruiter, you're a software engineer, you're a product manager, right? You don't need to raise your hand. I know many of you in here are that right now. And you've noticed this precipitous drop in job openings and that you've been competing with people. And people are like, oh yeah, if you're working in government or you're working in any of these other things in the Bay Area, you're doing fabulous. And you look at them and you're like, no, I'm not. And that's the chart that shows you. And the other piece of it is this next slide here, where we're talking about the SOM rule. The SOM rule is a rule created by Claudia Somm, noted economist, that states that anytime the unemployment rate rises by more than 0.5% over a year, then a recession is imminent. And that was triggered last month because it has happened. And so people are all running for the streets thinking that the recession is coming, even though GDP has grown. And the real truth of it is maybe this time, the data doesn't quite exactly fit in because we are in a much different market. More people own homes than ever that have a 3% interest rate, mortgage rate or below. People have savings still, I think, maybe not anymore. And you still have a lot of retail jobs and government jobs because Biden's presidency pushed through a ton of money and so forth. And so that keeps on going. And so there's a lot of different things to consider. But overall, like I look at this and I'm thinking, You know, Joe, Elisa, and I saw this coming months ago when we had the types of people that we had in our boot camp, and it's all starting to sort of materialize now. Next slide. And so, you know, we've seen a lot of this stuff coming up, right? Tech layoffs left and right. Cisco's laying off another 15% of their company. And people aren't even going to know until mid-September or late September. And they announced this in August. So morale over there is terrible right now. It's hitting the media landscape. Paramount laid off 15%. I have friends who are program directors who can't find work, and so therefore actors are struggling in LA right now because they also can't find work. Intuit laid off 1,800 employees. They're saying they're moving to AI, and then they blamed a bunch of their employees for low performers and threw them under the bus. Intel, they missed the AI boat, and so they're laying off 15,000, and they're pivoting. And you know, Dell laid off another 12,500. I jokingly say it's the same 12,500 they lay off every 5 years because they're a PC maker. And so, you know, they'll hire those people back at some point. But, you know, layoffs are the theme and they continue to be the theme. And you open your news reader every morning and some other company has claimed that they're in bad dire straits and it's not getting good. So that's kind of where we're at. And you know, this is inextricably tied with the state of the economy. So I'm gonna get a little econ professor with you right here. And so the reason why a lot of this is happening is because in 2022, we saw inflation go up like gangbusters. A combination of supply chain issues plus heightened demand for a lot of things, set prices soaring. Plus, of course, grocers and fast food establishments and restaurants simply just gouging us out of our minds. And so in response to this, the Fed's only way to cap this was to raise interest rates, which it did 525 basis points over a 1.5 year period. I like to call this death by interest rate hike because they did it so slowly and it just felt like this really, really annoying thing that by the time it got to its end, we were like, why couldn't we have just raised it all the way up and just done it? And so the reason why interest rates are raised is because the idea is to kill demand. And by killing demand, companies find it more expensive to have money out of the market that they've lent. They're not investing in startups. They're not investing in capital. And that in turn leads to layoffs. And that in turn leads to workers, like many of you who are in the attendee chat today, who have no money to spend. And that's why inflation goes down. And so it pains me every time to have to say this, but many of you are the collateral damage of the Federal Reserve because you are exactly in the behaviors that the Federal Reserve wants you to do so that you don't spend money and that you don't and that you aren't out there on the market doing consumerish things. But Albert, you might say, like, how could they do this to us? And you know, the response to this is the Federal Reserve and the government does not look at you as an individual. It looks at what it likes to say as the aggregate. If the aggregate of the economy is doing okay, then even if there are pockets of people like miners or hotel, hotel room cleaners or software engineers who work specifically on nuclear power plants who are struggling, that doesn't necessarily show up to them because to them, those are just a small segment of the society. But now, as we're seeing with a lot of this data coming out over the past week, that aggregation is starting to show broad-based collapse. You're seeing a lot fewer jobs for every single person out there. You are starting to see that more layoff claims are happening on a week-to-week basis. And that is going to cause the Fed to want to lower its rates here at the end of 2024 with the first rate coming in 2 weeks. So it'll kind of be our little Super Bowl. We're going to look forward to it. It'll be kind of fun. And then we'll move forward from there. And that's not all, though. There are some other issues that are also coming up, and that's on the next slide. And so we're not going to get political here, but we're just going to mention that we have a presidential election coming up in November in just under, I want to say, what, 60 days? I know Joe's busy out here fighting AI generated images of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump holding hands going down the beach and saying that these things aren't happening and they're not real.
It's real. They
And
took a beach vacation together, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
and so the thing you need to know about here is that there are a lot of companies that are holding off on spending until they feel like things can improve, or at least there's definitive clarity in whoever becomes the next leader so that they know how to act appropriately, right? So if you're Donald Trump, a Donald Trump supporter, you may expect that, and this is in broad brushes. I am by no way accusing one or the other or saying those things, so please don't come to me later. Is that, if you're a Republican, you're looking at tax cuts, and so maybe tax cuts will trickle down. If you're looking at a Democrat, maybe there's, higher taxes and that goes through the government in a different way. And so in both senses, we're looking at a future vision and we're looking at a different, two distinct visions. And until that vision plays out in the form of an election victory by one of these two, we won't exactly know what the future looks like. And a lot of companies are holding their job listings on the sidelines until something changes. All right, next slide. The other thing to consider is what companies are actually getting investment during this time, right? So CB Insights is a place that I look to often, as well as Crunchbase. And Joe will mention Crunchbase at some point tonight as well, in the sense that these are the companies that are up and coming, that are getting gangbusters of funding so that they can continue operating, and that they have a lot of investors who are riding on their coattails so that they can make a great ROI. And as everything shows here, it's generally in AI, internet services, IT services, e-commerce, financial services, and so forth that are currently taking the lion's share. What you're not seeing is the interesting, crazy stuff that you've seen over the past after the past 6 years, especially during the zero interest rate period, which is when we saw flying cars and random new social networks and new blockchain technologies coming out, right? Those are still interesting to a very niche set of people. For the folks who want that definitive investment to come back, it's AI, it's cloud technology, it's machine learning, it's some e-commerce, and then here at the very bottom there's environmental and energy consulting, and those are some of the things that are really on top of people's minds right now. Next slides. And so investors, right, are betting big on AI, right? So if you want to know how the world is going, AI is the place. As we saw in Q2, $24.1 billion was pumped into AI startups. And that's more than the previous 2 quarters combined, from the end of Q4 2023 until now. And look, I'm seeing some comments over-indexed AI. So I take the standpoint that you will need to know AI at some level for your career in the future. It may not take your job, but it is an effort at making you more productive. I think that one of these last two, and this is going to be my controversial comment, is that this last quarterly earnings for NVIDIA will be one of two earnings reports that will show that NVIDIA had a really, really fantastic quarter, and then it's all going to be downhill from there. And so what do I mean by that? I think that if you look into the details and look beyond the hype trends, what you're going to discover is that AI is a AI is an opera AI has been overhyped and overbought, in the sense that people thought it was going to replace entire swaths of society. And as most things in tech go, it's going to be something that they wanted to aim for the moon, and they're going to hit the stars. And when they hit the stars, it's going to be fiery and it's going to be flashy, especially for those who have hitched themselves to a wagon of very general AI. I think if you're looking at very specific AI tasks for things that are repeatable, or things like manufacturing quality or a chatbot, those are going to fare a little bit better. But overall, I would say here in the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be a reckoning, and it's not going to be great. Next slide. And so 2024, the remainder of it at least, is going to be interesting. We're going to see an interest rate expected this month, but relief is not going to happen until far, far after. So look for what I'm saying right now is that once we see these interest rate cuts go down, add another 6 months. So we will have a fully fruitful employed spring. Until then, it may be the one last dark winter we have for a while. Many investors are awaiting who's going to be the next president, and so they're pushing things back. AI remains hot, but the hype cycle is something that we should warn ourselves about. And that's where I say industry momentum is to be determined, because I think we're still at the very top of that hill, and we're just about to push that sled and go over a really steep ledge. Recession worries have amplified over the past few weeks. We had a really, really topsy-turvy jobs report the other month at the beginning of August, and tomorrow's report is going to say a lot. So if you're willing to get up at 5:30 a.m. on the Pacific Coast and go onto the Bloomberg YouTube channel, you can watch it all go down there. And I know I will. So let's see how it goes. And so, as I wanted to say, right, with all of this data considered, with everything that's been going on, if your job search has been a struggle, it's not you, it's the job market. But in the same sense as I've been also telling people, it's also a chance for you to take your own fate by the reins, and you also have actions that you can take to at least make it a little bit better. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about on the next few slides. So next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about philosophy here for the next few minutes. And many of you have probably heard about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is here on the next slide. Many of you know it's a framework that describes all the things that people need in order to feel at a certain level, whether it's physiological safety, self-esteem, love and belonging, or self-actualization. If you don't have the ability to breathe, food, water, sleep, even the ability to sweat, then you don't even have the basics when it comes to your life. Whereas if you're feeling like you are at some place where you're really, really good, you feel like you're ready to be creative, to have some level of self-esteem and confidence. And, it's crazy to think that when you're in a job search, a lot of us are living really at the physiological and the safety piece, because we don't have that level of income that's coming in that so many people depend on every single day. And so I've taken this and I've thought about this, and I've thought about this in the job search framework. And the way I thought about it is, if we need a system to think about how we survive, we also need to think about a system about how we get to that level of survival. Because a job search today is not just you walking down to your local industrial park or business park and walking down the hall and handing resumes to every single office. As much as our boomer parents and maybe Gen X cousins and parents might think that way, things have changed. And so let's look at that diagram a little bit on the slide after this one. And this is what Albert's List calls the hiring hierarchy. The hiring hierarchy is what I have pinned as the elements of a job search that are necessary to at least be in some completion so that you can know what it is that you're doing in your job search. So what I should say in rephrasing that, it's the elements of your job search that you need to have so that your job search can be at nearly its most optimal and complete process, so that you can feel like you are doing the right things to get to a point where you can at least get an offer and at the very minimum an interview. And so like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs 2 slides ago, this slide covers the things that you need to be at the very basics of your job hunt. So at the very minimum, you need hunger. You need an attitude of growth. You need to be self-aware of where you stand in your own career and how you bring value and deliver value to others. You need a sense of resilience, because you're about to get rejected a ton of times, and you need people to be there, or at least something there, even it could be your cat or dog, or even a punching bag, to ensure that you can get back to feeling normal. You need a good level of commitment, right? This is a unique job search where you can't say, I'm going to job search Monday and Tuesday, and then I'm going to take the rest of the week off. It simply does not work that way anymore. And then once you figured out the attitude points that govern you, it's about all the things that you've come to know and love when it comes to your job search that are the contextual pieces that will lead you to the promised land. This include the resume and the cover letter, your ability to have a personal brand and show people what it is that you're known for, your networking skills and where you're spending time so you can meet people, your job searching skills. So, what platforms are you using? What skills and certifications have you acquired? And then the big kahuna in this time, which is interviewing. And interviewing is especially important because, as you know, if you're not a very good interviewer in this tight market, any wrong turn of a story, and you're not going to move on to the next steps. And then if you're someone in here today who's a little bit more senior in their career, showcasing the right vision for how you'd like this job to evolve, the metrics behind what it is that you've done at work, your ability to connect with your work, both spiritually and with really just physically the work that you do. And then coming up with a strategic mindset are all things that boil up to leadership. And so the first two rows of this diagram are what you need in order to be somebody who can get any job. And then if you really want to move above that, it's those two rungs ahead. And so having most of these mastered, which is really tough to have, is going to help you get closer to that job offer. Next slide. And so this is what we just kind of said, right? We're going to offer you a combination of basically all four of these levels today. But the first two levels are absolutely essential. You need to know how to tell your story. You need to have the right attitude. You need to articulate. And then the rest is kind of gravy from there. And so what happens above that in the first two levels isn't necessarily important, but having a little bit is going to help you stand out. And so without further ado, we're going to move into the meat of this presentation. And it took us a half hour to get here, but telling the story and setting up is incredibly important for what happens next. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Joe.
Yeah, awesome. Well, first of all, really good sort of setting the stage, Albert. And I'm a big fan of the hiring hierarchy. Albert and other folks know, like, I'm like inherently suspicious of graphs and charts and things like that. But that, you know, like that is very real. And if you think about the two bottom pieces of that pyramid, especially like just being in the right space to start or restart a job search is incredibly, incredibly important. And a lot of us sort of go, me included, we will definitely go right to sort of like trying to fix our resume when we're not in the right space, right? Or going right to applying jobs when we're sort of not in the right headspace. So I think that stuff's really important. And, you know, the way I think about this whole presentation and kind of the way that Albert frames it is like, take time to go back. Definitely recommend take time to go back and kind of just like look through that and think about what that means for you. What are those things that fit into that pyramid for you? Because everybody's a little bit different the way that they approach it. So yeah, we're going to sort of talk through 5 strategies that are, you know, oriented towards creating that level of like success and consistency and flexibility that allows you to get through a job search and get to that job offer. And so it's very tactical. That's kind of how I tend to think about the job search in sort of tactical ways. So some of this will be, you know, fairly specific stuff. Yeah, and I'll share a few things in the comments as well, ask questions as we go along. Happy to kind of have a good conversation about things that work for folks and questions you have, et cetera. And then also I'll just mention we'll share the PDF with all the information, all the links are in there. There's lots of resources. And so don't fear, we'll get that over your way afterwards as well. So this first strategy is sort of making your job search scalable and organizing it. I hope this is not a surprise to anyone. I feel like this tip is sort of like, you know, kind of obvious, but the way that you do this is really important. And so I'm going to pop over to the web browser for a second and show you a couple of these first things on this slide, which are making sure that you have sort of a staged job search. And then making sure that you have a job tracker and sort of a strategy, you know, built that allows you to like stay flexible and stay sort of moving and gain momentum. So what does that actually look like? Let me pop over here real quick. So one of the things that we talk about in the bootcamp that we run, we've been doing it for about 4 years, And it was sort of built on, about a decade of experience, sort of learning about how to engineer a job search through the Alberts List community. Is we think a lot about job search in stages. And so this doc, which again we'll share, kind of gets into that in more detail. And so I'll just sort of share just a little bit about that because I think it's really helpful to be mindful about this. And, we're happy to take questions on that as we go along. Is like one of the things that happens is you mix sort of the cognitive tasks of a job search. And so you might find yourself applying in a given hour, applying for a job, writing a cover letter, doing an outreach, maybe like a networking outreach, or, trying to reach someone at the company to get a referral. Maybe all of that happens within the span of an hour, and you're also, doing some content on social media, scanning job search listings, etc. That's a lot of work to do that. And so one of the biggest things is just to structure it in stages. And so, for example, like, you don't have to do it exactly like this. This is just kind of an example that we use. You might make your stage one be about just finding job opportunities. And so, there's a bunch of tactics in this doc that are good examples. You can actually make a copy of this pretty easily. It's just a Google Doc. It's all open source materials that we provide, just kind of as part of our job search work. We'd like to send some good out into the world too. So it doesn't cost you anything to use these. You're totally welcome to use them free of charge. But you can make a copy and then, edit or adjust it. But an example would be like, stage one, you do job search activities. You sort of have all the regular places that you look, all of your regular habits and activities that can include networking. And then at the bottom of stage one, your conversion point, I'm talking a little bit in marketing speak. I know we've got I think I saw a couple of marketers or analytics oriented folks or product managers. So y'all are super familiar with conversion points. But the conversion point is at the end of stage one is adding a job to your tracker. And then you're moving on to stage two. So that you're not, if you're staging it, that you're not essentially trying to do stage 3 and 4 activities in the middle of stage one, because that's a heavy cognitive load. That's what tends to create a lot of stress in the job search. And I'll say, like, everybody does this a little bit differently. Like, if you think about, sort of tracking your activities, like, you might keep a job search calendar. Some people are very calendar oriented. So, this is just an example calendar we often use, where you block out time for applying, finding jobs, block out time for, for actually applying to them, and then maybe blocking out time for, networking, informational interviews, other things like that, but separating those, right? Again, so you're using calendar to kind of, separate those in stages. The other piece, just to mention, and I want to really give a big shout out to Selena Mendoza. This is probably the smartest thing that I've seen anyone create around a job search. Selena is a product manager and a product leader, and so is a very organized mind, as they tend to be. And so actually created an excellent template and sort of a how-to. And in this template and how-to, there's sort of a strategy set around it. She talks about how she does sort of networking outreach and content, sharing content on LinkedIn and other places. And then she talks about job tracking and has a dashboard. And so I won't go really deep into that, but what that actually looks like is in her job tracker, which you can copy. It's in that article. I'll make sure we send that out. You can actually have your own sort of little mini dashboard for all of those stages in your job search. And, you might adjust it as you go along. But it basically just allows you to kind of see staging of, things that that are jobs that you want to apply to. So like if let's say you're in that stage one I mentioned, and you're grabbing opportunities, you're scanning, and you're just adding them to your, your base here, or your like tab, essentially. That's kind of what this is. And then, just stacking that list. You can also see ones that you haven't applied to, and, maybe just set up the staging a little bit in a way that works for you. Once you get into the interview process, you can also kind of compare interviews and just basically makes it really easy and sort of functional to kind of structure the way and the strategy that you do. And so, like, just as an example, if you're doing outreach to contacts, you can even set up statuses and things like that. Now, you may not do it quite as detailed as Selena, because Selena, again, is sort of like a product manager mind and extremely organized, but something like this is extremely, extremely helpful. And so I recommend that folks think about it through that lens. And I'll grab the link here. Again, this will all be in the sort of the full PDF that we share with the links, and I'll probably drop it in right towards the end of the call as well, just so y'all have all that at once. But just if you want to take a peek at the actual job stages or structure doc, that's here. I'll put that into chat. So that's sort of the first piece, is like just thinking about organizing your search, and making sure that that it's relatively scalable. The other piece is, just being mindful that you're not adding too many more tools at a given time. I think, oh, I went right through my slides. There we go. One back. Oh yeah. I always say this too, because I think we can get sort of tool overload or tech overload. Everybody's a little bit different, and just make sure that you have a little bit of time blocked out to adjust and shift your habits as you go along. The way I've always done it, and I've seen it work well for people, yours may vary, but have 30 minutes towards the end of your week. Maybe on a Friday, you don't do anything afternoon, except you have 30 minutes blocked out to just kind of take a walk and think about your search this week. And, how was my time spent? Which tools seem to work? Which tactics did I like? How did it feel? Which ones just didn't seem to work? So maybe I need to let go of those or shift or adjust. Just make sure that you don't get sort of too married to like an ultra detailed set of tools and habits. And, it has to work. I have to do it this way. No, it's okay to be flexible and resilient, and, update and sort of adjust as you go along. I think that's sort of part of the process, and, and a good thing. So, okay. So the second piece, just to mention really quickly, is to be intentional about using AI tools. I think folks here are probably somewhat familiar now that they've sort of been in the market for almost 2 years now. But Teal is a common sort of all-in-one AI tool. You've got things like Kick Resume, JobScan. Zapier has a great article about AI tools sort of broken down by stage, like finding jobs, customizing materials, applying, interviewing, things like that. So I think just be really intentional. But Elisa and I have talked about this in the bootcamp quite a bit. Don't assume that any AI tool is going to sort of do all the work for you. Just be very like sort of tailored in the way in which you use it. And I also, just to be honest with you, wouldn't trust any companies or platforms that are like, this will just do your whole job search for you. I don't think we're at the point where AI technology is helpful in replacing big chunks of the job search. I think it's more about being strategic about when and where you use it. So okay, so that's strategy one, sort of organize it, make sure you're using AI tools, make sure you're being intentional, and you're testing them out in sort of specific ways. Strategy two is about being sort of focused in your search. And so we always say, like, look for the riches and the niches. That's a little bit of a marketing term for anyone who ever has dealt with SEO or long tail keywords. That's a sort of a hat tip or a joke about that. But it's basically about creating sort of lanes for your job search. And the goal is to sort of create lanes that are, fairly big and have a good amount of opportunities, but are not so wide that like you're never going to get that job, and it's just going to be frustrating trying to get it. And so I often, tell people, I think the good example is like, the more you sort of know about where you want to go, the more you can customize or sort of tailor that approach. And, obviously customizing all the other stuff, your materials and your interviews and positioning and outreach and things like that too. And so a good example is like, if you are thinking about a vertical, is like, let's say you're in the startup world and you want to, work in social impact startups, but you don't want to work in one that has a layoff. I won't pull up the example here, but Crunchbase is a good place to do that. You can actually find, startups that are listed at that stage, Series B. That's usually for non-startup folks. That's usually Series B is kind of around, it varies, but like 10 to 30 million in funding in a particular round. And, startups are usually getting funding rounds it varies, but like, 12 to 24 months, 1 to 2 years is pretty standard for startups. So Series B would be like, picking up 10 to 20 million. Social impact startup would be the focus. No layoffs. Well, I don't know if you're going to find a whole lot of startups without any layoffs at the moment, but you can look up stuff like that on Crunchbase, on Wellfound, which used to be AngelList, and things like that. And so, like, if you're going to pick a vertical, sort of build around it is a good, a pretty good strategy. So I think I won't go too deep on that, but I think that's sort of one of those things. Like maybe, it's hard to focus, so maybe picking, 4 or 5 sort of lanes like this at a given time can be really, really helpful. So, and also I'll say, I think too, if you're in that sort of crunch of like, sometimes I hear people say like, yeah, I've applied to 1,000 jobs this month. And, a lot of times the numbers game is not, I'm not saying it doesn't ever work, but it's not the best way to go, because it can be pretty exhausting to try to apply for 1,000 jobs in a month or even 500. And so this strategy can help you kind of stay focused or, there. and like I see a couple of comments in the chat, like about applying to 400 positions in a month and only getting sort of one bite, maybe a little bite. Yeah, I think there's something there to look at. I know that's frustrating and not really a good experience. This is pretty rough. And so usually, this is just kind of a slight detour, but usually if you're getting no response, that's either a match. Yeah, there's either something with your materials that might need some adjusting, or there's a match issue, right? Like maybe you're applying for something, like if you're switching industries, et cetera. So if you want to share a little more context for Heat in the chat, that might be helpful too, because that's, I think, something that happens a lot, and we know it's frustrating when people deal with that. So also, I'll mention that there are a lot of different kinds of research tools. If anybody uses any of these, I'd be sort of curious to know in the chat too. But like, if you're interested in working for a big company, Yahoo Finance is a pretty good tool. Like maybe you want to work in the entertainment industry, but you don't want to work for an entertainment company that is doing a lot of layoffs. Cough, cough, Paramount. There's a lot of stuff going on in the streaming wars right now, but Yahoo Finance could make it easy to look at the entertainment vertical, look at earnings from public companies, and then just screen the stuff out where they're not doing well, right? They're not making good money. Maybe you're looking for ones that have at least 25% year-over-year growth. And maybe you're comparing like legacy products versus, newer stuff. So tools like that can actually be really helpful if you are kind of really thinking about that lane a little bit more. Google Alerts are still super useful. They're not going to probably get you a lot of jobs listings, but they can tell you, if you sort of pick a lane, they can tell you how companies are doing, and that can be a thing, to keep an eye on. Like the phrases merger, acquisition, acquired, and then the industry phrase, like that's a Google alert that might sort of let you see movement in a particular industry that you're interested in. And that could net you, things to keep an eye on and opportunities for jobs, maybe not on the first click, but like over time. And then obviously, being sort of thinking about niche jobs boards, communities, and newsletters, I think most folks are aware, you've got your Facebook groups, your Slack groups, things like that. A lot of stuff does move through newsletters, and it does move through sort of small word of mouth listservs and communities and things like that. And so if you can find the people that are doing the things that you want to do that are passionate about it, oftentimes jobs will sort of be in and around those conversations too. And the other thing I always say is like, make sure you have sort of a preferred watch list of places that you really want to work at. I think a lot of people have that, but if you don't, that's a good strategy as well. Okay, so strategy 3. This is a little bit more about sort of making sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that really works well. And I think, folks sometimes sort of, we just sort of do the standard resume, and then we don't, we maybe don't move on, or we move on from it. We don't think about it too hard, or maybe we over optimize our resume and we don't sort of get the positioning dialed in. We think we need to have the perfect, impact point, like drove $20 million of data, drove $20 million of new customer revenue in 6 months and blah, blah, blah. Like I'm always kind of skeptical of those key points in resumes. And I know we sort of sometimes over focus on stuff like that, but positioning can be really helpful. And so an example would be data. For example, one of the requirements for AI to work in a company is for the data to not be totally crappy and unusable. That makes data work really important. So it's kind of a foundation, and there's a lot of skills and jobs around that, right? So whether your job right now or your experience now or in the past formally involves data or not, like you might be saying, oh, I'm not a data analyst. Well, did you ever have to gather data or download data in a spreadsheet? Did you have to sort of clean it or format it? Did you have to do presentations? Did you have to look at data and just sort of come up with some analysis and some recommendations, or try to make a decision based on data? That's a strategy thing. These are all data informed sort of tasks. And so like I often, I've had a few folks over the years that I've talked to who like kind of come from customer support, and they say, oh yeah, I don't really work with data. I'm like, okay, well then how do you know? Do you look at your queue? Do you sort of see what works? Do you know how many people you have, how many touches you have a week with folks, whether it's, live chat or phone or email or whatever. Like those are all data informed things. And so they're usually examples of things that you can usually talk a little bit more about it than you might think. And I think that's something to think about too. So, so another example would be kind of in the communications piece. And it would be a little bit around what I call like hybrid work communication. So this is like, we're in the middle of this problem right now, right? So if you think about a little bit about the chart that Albert shared, you got your pandemic, everyone goes remote, or closes down or pauses. And suddenly people have to figure out how to use Zoom and, et cetera, et cetera. I know for some people on this call, you're like, yeah, I knew how to do those things, but like a lot of people didn't, right? A lot of businesses and companies had to change or shift to remote friendly work or remote first work in a lot of cases. And now a lot of them are having to go back. Some of that is because I'm just going to wave over in one side of my house and sort of point at all the CEOs that are like taking calls on their deck, but they refuse to let employees work remotely. But anyway, long story short, you've got this sort of return to office, hybrid mixed strategy. And that actually is really hard and frustrating because managers a lot of times are not well equipped or don't know how to manage folks who are sometimes in the office, sometimes not. Sometimes some people are totally out of the office. I mean, there's a lot of complexities to that situation. And if you can position yourself to say, oh yeah, I'm very comfortable and have a lot of experience doing hybrid work and kind of working across different tools, platforms, and with people, that's a really in demand and a strong skill that underlies all the other stuff that might be in like your core job title or description. And so just here's sort of 3 examples. This is something you could potentially put on your resume or you could put in your cover letter or just describe, but like you're sort of folding or mixing those things in just to, create a conversation like, okay, cool. So, yeah, so you did customer support, but actually you also have quite a bit of experience in, looking at data to kind of try to see what users and customers need. Okay, yeah, I'd like to talk to you more about that for this, role where we have some analytics needs. Things like that. Shifting your positioning a bit can be, really helpful. And these are all sort of, we say recession-proof, but yeah, these are all sort of in demand and skills and things that are probably going to be of need and of value. Let me take a peek at the chat sheet just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Good question about skills versus search. Well, let's definitely talk about that towards the end as well. And I also asked a question to us sitting up on the panel about, we're asked to qualify our experience to produce those types of sentences. Like, what else can we do to bring our resumes up to date in verbiage? Yeah, Albert can definitely talk about this too. And I know Elisa and I have talked about this a lot, so they're welcome to chime in. I think a lot of times we end up putting too much fancy language in a resume when what we really need to, highlight is like, not the responsibilities, but the actual deliverables and the outcomes and the impacts. Like, my job was to do this, deliver X, Y, and here's how I did it over the course of, whatever timeline or zone. So I'm not going to sort of pull up a resume, but we'll share some materials that we've got around that too, that I think can help you see a little bit about like what kind of impact you want to put in. I think in general, if your resume under each job description has like some impact that you delivered, that's a key point, and how you did it. Maybe a little bit about like the tool sets you worked in and were responsible for, and then maybe also the teams that you collaborated with. If you've got those 3 things under each, role and a bit of like data to describe it, that usually does the trick in many cases. So, okay, so let me pop through and we'll come back and do all the questions if anyone's that we missed. So strategy 4 is translating tech skills to government. I noticed a little bit earlier, someone mentioned, applying for government jobs. That, those worlds can be a bit different. And I think that's the important thing to mention, especially when it comes to sort of finding opportunities. Things look a bit different. A lot of, government and nonprofit orgs don't necessarily post all their jobs or network on LinkedIn. They may not put them in ZipRecruiter or Indeed. They might use, nonprofits often use a site called Idealist. So that's like it's a job board, but it's a different kind of place where that stuff goes. With government, you've got USA Jobs and governmentjobs.com. In general, I would say like you can use a lot of the bigger platforms to research. So if you're looking to pivot or, find an opportunity in government or nonprofits or something else like that, LinkedIn is a great place to research, to find people, and especially finding people who've already done it. And so I'll give you like a really practical example. If you're thinking about maybe working in the federal government, one of the best sort of research opportunities is to look up the US Digital Service. I don't know if folks are familiar with that, but US Digital Service is sort of like a really tech forward unit. I believe it's within the White House administration officially. It's a really cool unit. I want to say Biden may have started that right after 2020, the 2020 to 2021 transition, when they actually allowed him to be the president. Joke about this information in my head there. But yeah, no, there's the US Digital Service, and what they do is they actually look at really big functional problems and then at different parts of the government, and then they find really tech savvy people. So like, for example, if you're aware, the IRS just launched the first free file for individual filers. It means if you make under, I want to say it's under 75K, you don't have to pay TurboTax, Intuit, or any other file. You can just do it for free through the government. And you know what? It actually works really well. It's like designed really well. That was designed by a bunch of people who used to work in tech and then got in through the US Digital Service program, which I don't think it's a fellowship per se. It's like it's like 2 or 3 year assignment. It's paid. It's really good wages and benefits. But there's things like that. So if you can find people who've made those transitions, they can usually help you, kind of, oh yeah, how would I make that transition? That's the question that you want. And I think there's opportunities for, informational interviews, and it's very easy to reach out. Like, I'm often sharing with people, like, if you find someone else who's made the transition you're trying to make, and you just ask a nice quick question and say, hey, I noticed you're trying to do this thing. I'm also trying to do this thing. Would you be open to a quick question or two? Most people are like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd be happy to do that. The other thing that you do have to do is sort of position a little bit differently. I'm kind of pointing at that already, but like, customer success is not a job title in government, and it's not very often a job title in nonprofits. So, you might have to reposition your resume. Maybe your actual job title is like customer success manager, but in the, the about of your resume and maybe your cover letter and the description, you're describing doing community outreach, doing training, doing data analysis, whatever, core parts of the job you want to highlight. It just might sound a bit different. And again, finding somebody who's already sort of made that transition tends to makes that process a little bit faster and easier. So, which actually is a good sort of lead into strategy 5, which is sort of about networking. I think folks, and I'd be interested to hear in the chat, how do people thought networking? Do you maybe just say like, I love it, it's okay, or like, I hate it? I'd be curious to kind of know the vibe for folks on this particular call. I feel like in most cases, it's kind of mixed bag for people. Like, I don't, there's a few people typically who are like, I love networking, it's awesome, I'm super excited, but most people are not, like feeling super, super excited about it in general. Yeah, and I see a kind of a little bit of a spread already in the chat. It can definitely be hard to do networking online for sure. Got some folks who kind of like to do it, but it's a little bit tricky. It can be hard to focus. Yeah. I definitely hear what Sarah is saying about like, yeah, I'm doing some LinkedIn messages, but not getting any responses and things like that. Events can be really hard too. It's just hard to fit it in because it's a time and energy game too. So I think the key is one, to thinking back to the hiring hierarchy kind of pyramid that Albert shared earlier. I think the key is just sort of like, you're going to have to go into it knowing there's a bit of it involved that you're not going to love. And, you might get these moments that feel like rejection because you're doing some outreach and you're not getting any response. So you kind of have to level set a little bit, first of all. And then second of all, I think just keep the stakes really low. And we talk about this in the bootcamp all the time. Keep the asks really small and keep the stakes really low and just have a good conversation. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief example, and then we can sort of move right on because there's some good examples in the open source templates doc, which, again, we'll sort of share I'll put the PDF back in and it has all the links here. We'll put that in chat. And then Albert always, sort of sends the recording and stuff like that afterwards. But in general, like let's say you're trying to make that transition to government. I know we have a couple of product managers, at least in this call. Maybe you are like, okay, I'd be open to do an assignment at the US Digital Service doing product management and making government services work better. That's a really cool mission. That's awesome. Maybe you go look at the US Digital Service LinkedIn page, you find a few people who've made that transition, which I've actually recently looked. There are definitely some people who worked in Silicon Valley that now, do US Digital Service stuff. And you just send them a very, very small ask like, hey, I saw you made this transition. I'm actually also making a pretty similar transition. Would you be open to a very quick question? And then ask, hopefully they say yes. You might need to send it to a few folks, but keep the ask small. It just makes it very easy for people to respond versus like if I get a cold message that's like, hey, I need some help. Can you look at my resume? And I'll also do, maybe like a virtual coffee, kind of a big ask for someone that I don't know. So let's just start really small. And then obviously, y'all are probably familiar, but like warm referrals or connections in are really helpful too. But if you find a few people through US Digital Service, you reach out, maybe you get a response or two. Maybe you also notice that, one of them is going to be on a webinar talking about their transition from tech to government. Okay, go attend that webinar. That's a really good opportunity to maybe connect with them. Like, so finding that small ask that's relevant, and that feels good and is conversational. I think that's sort of, that's really the way to approach it. And, it earns the chance to chat with folks and hopefully have a good connection and not something that feels really, sort of forced, which is good to avoid. Also, I see Lean put in the usds.gov address. Yes, thank you for putting that in the chat. That's awesome. That's perfect. And for folks who aren't doing government stuff, take a look at that. It's cool. I think as a program, just in general, it's sort of interesting. And some really good advice about, kind of being able to relax and just finding a way to have a conversation with folks and not necessarily, making it feel like high stakes. So, and then last but not least, we'll sort of wrap with strategy 6, which is sort of about fundamentals. I think this part is, just like make sure you're doing the basic stuff. Make sure you have a good resume and you're making sure that you're checking for typos. That, that seems obvious, but, just stay focused and sort of take care of the basics. Make sure that you're not, it's better to do quality than quantity in a job search. I think everybody probably has a slightly different optimization. Some people are like, I don't care. I'm going to do 1,000 applications a month and it's just going to have to work. That wouldn't work for me. For me, it might be more like 20 to 25 a week. Some people could do 50. I mean, you have to experiment a little to find out what works. But if you were missing this stuff because you're pushing so hard to hit volume, then, you probably have an issue that's going to be tough. And Albert, do you want to talk about this? Because this is sort of definitely more in your lane, I think, when you talk about attitude. And I just always appreciate the way that you sort of remind folks.
Yeah, so this is so the great mindset, great resignation mindset into a return office world is kind of how I've described the evolution of the last 2.5 years, where, like you mentioned, we were all working remotely, things were happy, our companies cared about our well-being, and then all of a sudden interest rates went up and they took everything back that they gave to us. And so expecting that level of generosity in a world that's changed is incredibly different. But that's not the only thing. The other thing is, if you turn your job search into a repeatable habit, then it's also even more impactful because you're at a point where you're building momentum, you're snowballing your job search. That's where I mentioned, like early on in this presentation, where if you uh, job search on Monday and Tuesday and then take the rest of the week off, you're stunting your potential and what you can do. And so having that community, having that accountability within your circle of influence is incredibly important because it helps you keep that momentum going. It's a place to go and talk to people who know you, like you, and are rooting for you to win.
Yeah. Good place to just kind of quickly mention, as Albert kind of hit at the top, we'll just share like a quick picture of the 8 weeks to employee bootcamp that we run. We usually do it twice a year. The next one starts next week. Super exciting. I think when you think about community and accountability, look, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, like, you could do, and this information is out there, right? It's not all sort of super secret information, but I think having, having support and having like accountability and some peers in a team, that really does go a long way for most of us to stay focused and also just get feedback in those harder moments too. And so I'll just sort of walk you through the way that we structure the boot camp. And we're happy to take questions. We'll also take a couple minutes at the end to kind of go back through the chat and answer other questions as well. So the model for this is, week 1, we kind of do that base stuff. So a lot of the context that Albert provided around the hiring hierarchy and just kind of what do you actually need to be successful. That's what we get into and call that understanding you. And it's really about positioning and goals and just making sure that you've got yourself sort of in the right place to start your search or restart your search if you're kind of going back and refining. Week 2 is always, super about the fundamentals. That one I think is often the one that answers all those questions about like, what does a modern resume look like? What's sort of the basic, online social media, LinkedIn profile, et cetera, that I need to have. And so we sort of like, just what materials you need to have at a minimum to make it work. And there's lots of good stuff during, week 2. We really get into kind of all of the nuts and bolts and the tactics. And then week 3, we kind of get into like you know, how to go about and find, you know, opportunities. So when you think about that staging that I talked about, kind of that stage one of where and how to find, you know, opportunities, as well as like, what are the habits, you know, that you need to have? What does that look like? Helping people refine, et cetera. And then we do get into like kind of like a good, really strong networking piece that's typically in that fourth week. We're looking at, you know, what does it look like to use LinkedIn to do outreach and networking? We've got a ton of templates and scripts and tips and guidance and things like that that we do in that week. Elisa will typically also kind of talks through branding for LinkedIn, you know, just sort of everything you need to know to have a good basic networking strategy. And, you know, if it's been a while or you're kind of like, I'm used to doing it on, you know, in person, but not online, like we go through all those kinds of things. And then we also go through interviewing. That's sort of like about halfway through the boot camp. We sort of talk about interviewing fundamentals, the different types of interviews, how to prep, lots of, you know, again, sort of lots of guidance, tips, templates, things like that. And we usually also fold in, some of you have probably attended, but if you're not aware of it, Albert does mock interviews, like virtual mock interviews, and we do fold that into that part of it too, to like just help people practice and sort of get that, you know, that muscle warmed up.
And the reason why, by the
Yeah.
way, we give you everything in advance here, including the Google Drive, is because we understand that you can go onto YouTube and all these influencers on TikTok, and you can DIY your job search. I can't promise you it'll be like easy, but it's doable. You can cobble together 10 weeks worth of content from everyone from Austin Belsack to all the folks out there that are famous. But one thing that I would say that, you know, what that I focus on here is accessibility. The price is accessible. The content is accessible. I'm accessible. I've been known to put my phone number in the webinar chat and still nobody texts me. And so, you know, what I want here is to give you the skills that I've learned over the years and that Joe and Elisa have helped me refine so that you can have the job search you deserve and not have to look at $7,000 price tags and look at people who want to tell you what your job search is like 30 seconds at a time. We're here to give you 8 sessions plus another 8 office hour sessions and maybe beyond that, plus all of this content. And then we're going to help you execute upon that because you're looking for a job, you have bills to pay, rent was due 5 days ago, and we got to figure this out together.
Yeah, it does help to have that team piece. And, you know, I think we do think a lot about it through that lens of like making sure that you're doing it in a way that is sustainable for you, because it is really easy to burn out on a job search. And also sometimes you know, if you are feeling burnout or overstressed and, you know, you have other obligations, which pretty much all of us do, family, kids, you know, volunteering, et cetera, trying to keep the roof over your head, bills paid, it can be really hard to be in the right frame of mind to navigate, especially once you get into that interview place where, okay, I've done the mechanics, I've gotten my system together, done the mechanics of finding the right opportunities. That's starting to happen. Now I'm in that, you know, I've applied, now I'm starting to get callbacks for interviews. Like it's really important to be in the right space for that. And that's the big part of why the back half of the boot camp kind of goes into like, you know, we call it navigating change and building credibility in those 2 weeks. And that's really about like, you've got interviews now. How do you read the room on what's happening across the table with that company and that hiring manager? How do you make sure that you can illustrate, yeah, I understand the nature of the challenges or the opportunities that you're going after, you know, and find and match yourself to that to say, yeah, I've actually done that kind of thing. Let me share a little bit more about that. Because I think once you're into that interview stage, and particularly the further you get in, that's really the question is it's usually about credibility, right? It's about that. If you think back to that hierarchy piece that Albert mentioned, the further up the pyramid you go, the more it is about like understanding and listening and seeing the context of the place that you're applying to and being able to match yourself to that. And then finally, last but not least, we sort of close out with the classic, you know, how to do offer letters and negotiation, how to set that whole conversation up so that, you know, you get what you want, but you don't get burned, you don't create a, you know, an adversarial position. So lots of tips and templates and practice that kind of come up in that last bit of the bootcamp as well. So yeah, Albert, anything you want to add? I think that's kind of the basic structure for the bootcamp. And
Yeah, and so I'm just gonna drop it in there. And so for this particular one, I know the price may seem high. I want to offer this to everybody that is here that, we know that there are many of you who have been out of work for a while. If a payment plan is something that interests you, please reach out. Here's my phone number. Oh, wrong digit, wrong last digit.
Oh, I'm going to text that message
Um,
right now. The person's going to be so confused.
My person is so confused.
I'm ready,
Um,
Albert. Let me in.
and I'll give you a code. And we'll talk it through. And when you get a job, you can pay me back. And so the other piece of this is, who our boot camp is for. And I also want to let you know too that we have other boot camps coming up on specific topics. This is the boot camp that covers everything. We do have events coming up that will cover resumes. We do have events that are coming up that will cover interviewing. And we have another specific boot camp coming up that's going to cover software engineering interviews. This one gives you the whole 360-degree view of what the job search looks like. Those, if you know that interviewing is your challenge, I want to invite you to look at that one instead. If you know that that resume writing is going to make a difference, I encourage you to look at that one. And for this one, it's all the 8, 9, 10, 12 topics that we've looked at. And so that's what this final slide is, to understand, like, really, if you are here and you're looking and you're putting your mouse on the submit button, yeah, it's for you if you needed a job yesterday and you're tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's for you if you are somebody who has been doing this job search alone, right? Like, we're all sitting at home at our computers looking into a screen for 8 hours a day trying to make sense of this market. If you want to hop on something for 8 weeks where you see people, and you can still continue to see people, like, um, we give you a LinkedIn chat where you can talk with your cohort forever, and you can meet up with them if they want to meet up as well. And so if you want someone to hold you accountable, if you want me and Joe to look at you in the eye every single week and be like, get it together, let's figure this out, we're here for that. Um, and if you've been out of the job market for a while and want to know how this is all done in 2024, so if you've been out of the market and you're on the market now for the first time since like 2012, maybe since the
It
1990s,
looks a little different. I'm not going to lie. Yeah.
it looks way
It-
different. Yeah. You're not
yeah.
going on Career Builder. Hot Jobs doesn't exist anymore. You're definitely not going down to the local business center and pounding the pavement.
Not a whole lot of paper
Um,
resumes, occasionally, but
yeah.
not too often. Yeah.
And uh, and if you're a new grad and you're doing it for the very first time, and the total cost is $295 for the whole thing. It's $395 if you want some one-on-one attention. And so yeah, if there's opportunities to pay it forward, there's always a chance to pay it forward for sure. I don't quite know what that quite looks like here, but if you want to buy somebody a ticket, Aline, I'm sure somebody wouldn't mind. So yeah, I mean, the takeaways, Joe, yeah, talk them through.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of talked through it, but just to rework, like, big takeaways are just like get organized right off the bat, make it scalable, make sure that you have a little bit of process and structure, make sure you've got that focus and you're creating lanes and letting go of lanes too, right? If certain niches turn out not to work for you, that's fine. But just like having that focus, making sure that you're using good positioning for yourself for skills that are going to continue to be relevant and are especially relevant now. Recession-proof skills, we call those. If you're thinking about moving from tech to other areas, you're not alone. A lot of people are thinking about that, but translating that does take a little bit of work. So just making sure that you're doing that. And then the always classic, we call it keeping the fires warm, but make sure you're making sure that you're doing networking. You're not, letting your job search get totally cold. This happens a lot. Albert talks about this too, where like you get a job and then you're just kind of like, all right, I'm good. I don't need to do any networking or any kind of job search activities. Well, in the current world, you need to warm it up and keep it warmed up. It's just kind of part of the life that we live now. And that doesn't mean you have to be like an expert social media person and have the profile that's of someone like Albert, who's like an excellent connector and networker, but just like having a strategy for yourself and keeping it warm, I think is something that really helps your search over
Yeah.
time. And definitely if you remember back to that where I was sort of sharing Selena Mendoza's job tracker and the way that she describes doing networking content, go take a look at that. That's really smart. It's a very functional, doable way to do it that doesn't, anybody could do that, whether you feel like you have a lot of time or energy or not. Like the way that she thinks about it, I think is really smart. So that's a good resource for sure. Yeah, and we'd love to have folks join us for the boot camp starting next week. It's, I always say, Albert knows this because I always say this, like, the reason Albert, Lisa, I do this boot camp, we've been doing it for 4 years now, is really because we want people to be connected. We don't want you to be isolated. We don't want you to feel disconnected, because that's one of the key factors in a job search, is to have good support and have, good folks around you. And that's why we do the boot camp. That's the primary reason for it. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Albert, anything else you want to add? I'll take a look through the chat and see what questions I might have missed. And I'll also drop the PDF in for folks that has all the links. Let me just hop off screen share and I'll grab the PDF version and I'll pop that into chat here in a second as well.
Yep. So one question we have is, oh, yes, you can definitely get in touch, Matt. Here's my email again. And here's my number. All right. So, okay. How much credibility is there to articles that take most of the job listings on LinkedIn Indeed are fake listings because companies are creating an illusion of company expansion? There's a lot of credibility to that. In fact, I think it's 100% credible that companies are doing this, and it's really a sad state of affairs. And so that's why networking and keeping the fires warm are important. That's why being able to ask what the real state of things is key, because then you get to learn the real story. Do we need to have a website or portfolio to get a job? No, you don't. A portfolio depends on what it is that you do for a living. So if you are a graphic designer, if you're a software engineer, if you're a marketer, having graphics assets, having design assets, having a GitHub, and having marketing assets that you've developed is important. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so cool. I'm going to drop this link again in here. It is $295 for the 8 weeks. If you need a payment plan, my email is here. Please send me an email and let's talk it through so that we can get you the help that you need. We'll be sending some follow-ups. We'll have probably some more additional surprises as well. So I'm considering a job opportunity in an AI company in San Francisco. Given the latest media reports, should I be concerned about relocating to San Francisco? Yeah, it's San Francisco is interesting. You absolutely should consider your safety because it is not safe in some places. I think the not safe places tend to be the Tenderloin, south of Market, downtown. But the rest of San Francisco is pretty okay. So yeah, I would say that yeah, definitely consider it for sure. And that's a topic also. We analyze offers and offer letters in our second to last or last week as a part of negotiation. So that's something to look at too.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, I mean, San Francisco is lovely and an amazing place, and I think, from the outside, some of the coverage is sort of local news. It bleeds, it leads. Like any city, there's issues. There's affordable housing and unemployment challenges, and there's folks who are unhoused. And I mean, there's a lot of dynamics.
Yeah.
Is it overrunning the city the way that news media make it seem? No, not. I don't really think that's the case. There are definitely things to watch out for and take care of yourself, but I think some of that is a bit overblown just in my experience. And, but obviously talk to people on the ground, but that's kind of the way I think about it. I would also recommend, if you're thinking about an AI company in San Francisco, just like be really cognizant. Hopefully you're doing this already, but just in case, be really cognizant of like, looking at, kind of the where the company is at. Is it venture funded? Is it public? Like, how is it making money? How is it getting funded? AI, tech, San Francisco, like it's a complicated, slightly frothy world. Oh, OpenAI. That's a complicated place. Lean, if you want to message me on LinkedIn, and just let me know the role. I'm happy to take a little deeper peek at it too and do kind of a quick read the room on them. That's definitely a complicated one. So they're not in danger of running out of money, but they're also not really making any money at the moment. So that's a complicated scenario. So. I think I'm just looking back to see if there's any other questions. I think we covered almost everything. There were a few different questions earlier about kind of like the and stuff. Take a peek in the deck. There's on a few slides it mentions the 8 weeks to employ open source materials. So we kind of shared that. In those docs, there's a subfolder for resumes and some advice and tips and examples and things like that. So if the folks are kind of wanting to take a peek and see what what they need to do with their resume or cover letters or things like that, there's a bunch of good stuff in there that can help with that too. So yeah, I think that's it. Albert, anything else you want to add before we at least?
No, I don't have
before
anything
we
else
get
to
rolling?
add at the moment. Elisa, do you have anything to add? It's just,
Mhm.
we're here to help. We want to help. It'll cost you a little bit, but it's worth the investment. And we're here to follow up with questions as well as even more resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, plus one to what Joe and Al, the magic is really in the community and just us supporting each other. And as I mentioned right about the investment, please come talk to us. We're here to help however possible. But I kind of liken it to joining a gym. Like I wouldn't work out by myself. Like just having the community is super helpful and getting going. So just showing up is the hardest step. And thank you all for spending time with us tonight and hope you found some value in it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't, I said it a little earlier, but don't do it alone, right? I think that,
Don't do it alone. Yeah, don't do it
we
alone.
all have intellectual things. We're like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing.
If you have a
And it doesn't always
question,
happen.
please
It's
put
just,
it in the Q&A or
yeah,
message me or text me.
yeah, we're kind of in your, and, in addition to all the job search stuff is make sure we're connecting you to good resources so that you have good support and peers and things like that in the search. So.
Yep.
I
Alrighty.
think that's it. I see Matt has their hand raised. Matt, did you want to chime in on
Oh, I think you
this?
want to send the slides that that you had sent earlier. What were
Oh
those
yeah,
slides?
yeah.
Oh yeah, you had sent those. Yeah. Yeah, those
Yeah, I
right
dropped that
here.
in there's and it has all the links from everything we looked at earlier too. So that should get y'all
If that
covered.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we look forward to doing it together with some of you, and we'll follow up. Thank you all so much again for your time, and we will catch you on Monday. And if not before then, within our email newsletter. Talk to you soon,
Awesome. Great to
everybody,
see everybody.
and have
Amazing.
a wonderful
I'll see
rest of
you.
your week. Bye.